What's up, guys? It's Hunter Sitchy from CheckShowPoker.com, and I'm back for the final installment of this three-part poker training video package. And today we're going to talk about post-flop play. So we're going to go over objectives, reasons to bet, value betting, checking back, leading the turn, barreling, check calling, check raising, calling check raises, floating, 3-bet pots, 4-bet pots, and 5-bet pots before wrapping it up with some closing words. Let's get started. I'd like to start us off by going over objectives. So, those of you who know me know that I was a critical care paramedic for 2 years before I decided to quit to play poker full time. And during that 2 year period, I learned a lot about systems theory because I was often placed in unstable, chaotic environments, and I had to make good decisions to keep people alive. And in order to do that, I needed to understand protocols, guidelines, and critical thinking skills. Protocols are for things that happen all the time, like treating diabetics. Guidelines are for things that don't happen as frequently, like treating a diabetic with a seizure disorder. And then critical thinking skills are for things that almost never happen, like treating a diabetic that also has a seizure disorder and happens to be a hemophiliac and happened to drive off a bridge into a frozen river, right? And so far, I've taken those processes and applied them to poker, and I think I've done a pretty good job of teaching you the protocols involved in poker. So now you understand opening ranges, flatting ranges, three betting ranges, etc. And now I'm about to teach you the guidelines and critical thinking skills as well. So part of that is closing your eyes and imagining that you're a blind poker player for a second and just asking yourself what you would need to know to make good decisions, right? I think you would start off by asking what the blinds were, what game you were playing, how deep the stacks were, where you were in relation to the button. And after finding out that you're actually on the button, you would probably want to know who the blinds were before actually looking down at your hole cards. And then at that point, you could refer to the protocols that I've taught you, and you would know that you should be raising king queen always in this situation. And then you go ahead and execute. You actually raise with that hand. And after getting called by the big blind, you go post flop. And the first question you would want to ask yourself is, what is the size of the pot? What is the flop? What is villain's defense range out of the big blind? How often is he going to check to you? And then what are you trying to accomplish against him? And that's what leads us to the three reasons to bet. You can bet for value, meaning that you think you can get called by a worse hand over half the time. You can bet as a bluff, meaning that you don't think villain is going to meet minimum defense frequency. Or you could bet for protection. And in this situation, betting with top pair second kicker, you definitely are not bluffing. So you have to decide if your hand is strong enough to go ahead and bet for value and protection. And in this case, I definitely think it is. One of the things that I wanted to do with this post-flop training video is actually take some of the more interesting hands from the book and punch them into Poker Snowy to show you how often I was suggesting an exploitative play. And in this situation, villain checks, and I suggested betting half the pot. Snowy actually suggests a mixed strategy. It goes back and forth between checking and betting, and both of them have the exact same EV 6.49 big blinds. And as a default, it would use a pot size bet. If that was the case, it would actually check back here. I really disagree with this against live opponents. So already, this is the first exploitative suggestion that I made in the book. I actually suggest betting half the pot. Let's say that you go ahead and do that. And villain check calls. Now the turn is the ace of diamonds. Villain checks. And I told you guys to check back in the book. Snowy definitely agrees with that. And then on the river, 7 of spades rolls off and villain bets half the pot. And I told you guys to fold here. And now I know that that is actually an exploitative suggestion because I wrote the book before Poker Snowy Pro was as advanced as it actually is today. And apparently there is enough error in villain's range for you to be calling against an all-powerful supercomputer. So there would be enough 10-9 offsuit, 10-8 offsuit, and 8-9 offsuit in Snowy's bluffing range on the river that you could make a call. What is the difference between what Snowy is doing and what all of your human opponents are doing? Personally, I don't think your human opponents are firing off on blank rivers like this often enough, especially at the lower stakes, and that's why I would suggest folding against them. Another thing I'd like to point out is that even if you were playing against a perfectly balanced opponent here, you would only be profiting 6/10 of a big blind by calling this river. So that's another important thing to note. When the EV is very close, you really have to consider what your human opponents are doing before taking Snowy's advice and just running with it. Here's another interesting spot when you take my analysis and compare it to Snowy's analysis. So let's say it folds around to hero on the button, who decides to open with Queen Jack offsuit, totally standard. Small blind folds, big blind calls, and the flop comes Queen of clubs, 8 of spades, 6 of hearts. Villain checks, and now it's on hero. So in the book, I said to bet half pot, and if Snowy elected to use this size, it would be betting a half pot 100% of the time, and the EV of that would be 6.35 big blinds. However, it defaults on betting the pot on this flop for balance purposes, and in that circumstance, it would be checking with Queen Jack offsuit 100% of the time, and the EV of that would be 6.31 big blinds. So I elected to use a slightly different sizing with a slightly higher EV without ever punching this hand into Poker Snowy Pro because it wasn't powerful enough to do this at the time. So let's say that we bet half the pot, villain calls. Now the turn is the 9 of diamonds, and the point that I wanted to bring up here in the book is that way too many people check back on this turn. They're afraid of 2-pair and slope played sets and straights, and they just generally don't want to get check raised. And I'm vehemently against that. I think you really need to go and bet for value here. There are way too many gut shots and open enders on this board to be checking back. Snowy agrees with me. It's going to go ahead and fire off a half pot bet, which has a 12.84 big blind expected value. Let's say we do that. And now the river is the king of spades, and villain checks. And I think that this is a very easy